Hey everybody, this is Perch. This mail, I think, is an interesting question that several of you will want to weigh in on. But basically, this gets to the core. The meaning, what are the core comic books? If you had a comic shop or a shop and you only had 10, 12 comic books, what are you putting in there? What are the ones that are going to allow you to be profitable month in, month out with the comic books you're selling? Right. So really this is a minimal approach. And I think there's some value in this in thinking through this because even if you are a retail comic shop, you've got, 80, 90 books a month, whatever you're sorry, a week. They're trying to filter through there. You're not going to be marketing 90, 100 books a week. You've got to pick and choose what it is you're going to market. One of the things that I always find a little frustrating, I guess, and I give this advice when I talk to friends who have comic shops, is if you have a wall of comics there and you've got, you're basically putting a little label on the new this week as you're putting the comics up, that's a good start, but it's really the bare minimum. You need to do a little bit more than that. And quite frankly, because you have all these comics and the way most shelves are set up with all the different titles and colors and words and everything else going on in this, it's just a blast of information. Your new this week label tends to disappear. You got to do more to kind of draw out week after week. What are you going to really market? And you really have to get somewhat merciless. It's not just what's new, it's what kind of books are you really wanting to stand out and sell? Because if you're a retailer, you order these books ahead of time, you over ordered on something because you're thinking you're going to be able to turn it or flip it or, you get some momentum out of it. So how are you going to do that? Like, for example, just you got to think through these things. If you're a retailer and you ordered big on Daredevil because the Marvel told you that there is a brand new character debuting and it's going to be a big deal and everything else. Okay, cool. Well, Marvel told you that on the solicitation. We cannot trust that Marvel's going to do an effective job on the cover of this comic informing you that there is a new character here to pay attention to. So, what are you going to do to carry through that message of there's a new character here? It's going to be pretty cool. There's going to be a major villain for Daredevil over the next year, whatever it happens to be. How are you going to get that into the heads of people who are just browsing your shelf without you having to stand by the shelf? And like, if people show any kind of interest in Daredevil, you point to, you like, that's a new character that's debuting on that thing. How are you going to do that? How are you going to pull it out? Anyway, something to think about. This entire topic came from an email, and the email it goes like this. It says, "Good morning, Perch. I dig your videos, and I have a question for you. I am opening up a shop, not a comic shop." I like how there's that quick disclaimer. Not a comic shop. I'm not a crazy person. Anyway, I'm opening up a shop. However, it would be fitting to have one comic stand in my shop. Cool. Cross sales. Good for you. Featuring 10 to 12 comics only. I wanted to have the best selling comics there. What do you think are the best sellers, excluding manga? So far, I have guessed this list: Amazing Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, Hulk, Daredevil, Action Comics, Detective Comics, Batman, Transformers, Spawn, 2000 AD. It says, "Do you think my list is close enough? I respect your point of view. I am in Australia." Okay, that was an important thing. It's kind of bearing the lead there a little bit. If you're in Australia, okay, a little bit. It's why the 2000 AD came into picture, because I'm telling you, in a U.S. market, that's not going to be selling well. But in Australia, yeah, I think you have a bigger shot there. Anyway, kindest regards to you and your family and friends. Thank you so much. So let's go into, top 10 comics from my perspective. And I'm looking at this from the lens of Australia, because that's where you are. But I think most of this logic will hold up just about anywhere. The way I would think about this, and by the way, I will just throw this out to you. Comic books are coming in, week out. So if you're only featuring 12, let's say, then you're going to be presented at times with a situation where half of your 12 are going to come in on the same week. And then you're going to get nothing new for a week or two, just based on how sometimes comic books ship and the screwy schedule and everything else. So you got to decide, are you trying to build up a business where people are coming in once a month to buy the comics that they're collecting? Or are you trying to build a business where somebody is buying a comic once a week, every week? Because I think those are two very different things. If you're trying to get somebody to buy a comic every week, then I think you're going to need more than 10 to 12, but not too much more. I think the critical mass you want to go to is you want to try and be in a situation where you've got 4 to 5 comics every week that are coming in new, which would put you at about 16 to 20, maybe 25 on a longer month. But that's kind of where you want to be at. That may be too much. But here's what I would do. I would think about it in thirds. Okay, so a third, a third, a third. So if we're talking 12 comics, right? Then we get 4 comics in one category, 4 comics in another, 4 comics in another. So what I would try and do is I would try and go with 4 comics that are your staples, your breadwinners, the biggest of the big. And then I would go for 4 comics that are more collector based. And I'll explain that in a minute. And then I would go for 4 independent/kid books. Because if you're trying to just kind of draw a comic buying audience in your store and you're just trying to provide like a teaser into this bigger world of comics, but not get all the way into it, then a third, a third, a third is a good way to think about it. So in Australia, I think, Australia that market tends to go for popular, American Western comic books. I think you need to have kind of your big 4, which is going to be your Amazing Spider-Man, Batman, Action Comics probably over Superman, but one of those two. And I would go Avengers. So you have 2 Marvel, 2 DC. Spider-Man, Avengers, Batman, Superman. That would be my first third. My next run would probably be something along the lines of, for DC, probably Justice League. Maybe, depending on the market, Wonder Woman. Alternatively, Flash. Again, thinking of Australia as a market. For Marvel, I'm probably putting in there, the challenge is, and it hurts me to say it, I'm probably not putting in an X-Men book. I might put Wolverine there. But that, and then the other one, depending on the market, Deadpool didn't have the same kind of, huge burst despite the actors in the latest movie, in Australia as others. I'm probably putting something like the new Fantastic Four, maybe the Hulk. And that's probably what I'm doing. And then for the last third, the 4 independent books, I am probably putting in 2000 AD. I'm probably putting in G.I. Joe. I'm probably putting in Transformers. And then I would probably put in something like Ubbies or The Deep, which is an Australian-based comic. I'd try and get at least one Australian kind of core independent book in there. That's probably what I would do. So I think that's kind of the angle. So the actual books, depending on what market you are, if you're in France, if you're in California, if you're in, Poland, I would try and think up your line in terms of a third, a third, a third. And then I would try and figure out how many books you want going on the shelves. So if you did go, a third, a third, a third, then maybe I'm doing, 4 books or 5 books or 6 books in each category. And if it's a Western-based market, I mean, if you're over in Europe, then you got to get asterisks in there. There's a couple other things you want to kind of throw in. Granted, that's not a monthly shipping cycle, but I'd have a placement there. I'm going to ignore Japan for a moment because it said no manga, but I would think about it in terms of, you need to put in your core Batman, Spider-Man, Superman, Avengers. Those in theory should be your big books. I wouldn't bother with Captain America outside the U.S. That's just asking for trouble. I do think for Marvel, I think things like the Hulk, Wolverine. They've screwed up the X books so horribly. I'm probably putting something like that in. Given how Daredevil the book operates, I probably wouldn't go there either. Fantastic Four is a safe bet. That's kind of where we think. The one thing I would try and avoid is getting 2 books. So I wouldn't get Batman and Detective. I would also be really thoughtful of your market before you get into the world of Ultimate Spider-Man or Absolute Batman or any of that kind of stuff. Understand if your market's gonna go. The thing that I think, if you're at a very limited set of books, 10 to 12, then I think you're trying to get core. The market you're appealing to are not heavy comic collectors. You're trying to catch kind of, casual fans coming in wanting a comic. And that's why I think, for Australia, I mentioned Ubbies. I would try and go for some stuff that skews a little younger. Archie might be something that Archie has got mixed results depending on the region, but I would try and go for something that's going to skew younger as well, because you're basically telling me you're going for a casual market. So that's kind of what I would do. Anyway, third. That would be the business logic I would choose to follow. But I think the question goes out for all of you. Okay, play Sim comic store owner. What are you putting in your shop? How are you thinking about it? What's the breakdown of the products you're going to have there, and how are you going to assess it? I'm very curious to know. So let me know in the comments below what you've got going on. Like and subscribe, of course. And thanks for listening.